The first sound I remember from that night was the soft chime of cutlery meeting porcelain. One, two, then silence. Someone's fork hovered midair, dripping gravy onto the linen tablecloth. Across the table, my brother Nathan stared at my laptop as if it were a loaded gun. The glow from the screen painted his face in eerie blue. 12.3 million. The number sat there in quiet arrogance, shining brighter than the candles. "Is this some kind of joke?" my mother asked. Her voice was trembling, polite in the way people sound right before they explode. Nathan turned the screen so everyone could see. "She's been hiding it, $12 million, while we're drowning in debt." The room went still. The cranberry sauce congealed beside the untouched turkey, the scent of rosemary and truffle butter suddenly sickening. My father's jaw tightened. The chair creaked as he leaned back. I didn't move. My wineglass was still in my hand, and I was staring at the reflection of the candles in the dark surface of the liquid. It was easier to look at that than at their faces. 12 million, Kira? My father's voice finally broke the silence. "Where did you even get that kind of money?" I wanted to tell him that money had names attached to it, names of clients, museums, collectors, auction houses, but I knew he didn't care. He never cared about what I did, only about what I could give. "I work," I said softly. Nathan laughed, sharp and mean. "Yeah, you work in that dusty jewelry store you always talk about. Must be selling diamonds straight off the black market." The laughter died as quickly as it came. My mother's chair scraped backward. "How could you, Kira? We've been struggling to keep this house, your father's back pain, the loans, and you never once thought to help." I looked at her and wondered when exactly I had become the villain of her story. Maybe it was the day I stopped needing her approval. "I did help," I said, my tone steady, "for 2 years. She blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The anonymous transfers," I whispered, "every month." Nathan frowned. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. "You mean? I mean the money you thought came from your wonderful son?" The words left a bitter taste on my tongue. I hadn't planned to say them, not like this, but the air was already thick with hypocrisy. What was one more truth? Nathan slammed the laptop shut. "You're lying." "I'm not." For a moment, the only sound was the slow tick of the clock on the far wall. I could feel every second pressing against my skin. My father exhaled heavily. "If that's true, then you could have done more. You still can. You're part of this family. You owe us." There it was, the word that had followed me my whole life. Oh, when I was 9, I owed my mother obedience. When I was 16, I owed my brother silence. When I left home, I owed them guilt. It never ended. I set my wineglass down carefully, afraid that if I didn't, my hands would tremble. "I don't owe anyone anymore," I said. Nathan's face twisted. "Unbelievable. You'd rather hoard millions than help your own blood." He didn't remember, of course, how many nights I'd watched him from the hallway when we were kids, him coughing, mother rushing to his side while I was told to stay away, just in case. He never knew how small I'd felt, standing in a doorway no one opened for me. "Maybe," I murmured, "I just learned from the best." The insult landed. I saw it in his eyes. My father's fist hit the table so hard the plates rattled. "Enough!" The candles flickered. For a moment the smell of smoke overtook the room. I stood up slowly. The chair legs scraped the floor with an awful sound. "You should eat before the food gets cold." "Kira," my mother started, reaching out. Her hand froze midair, uncertain. I took a breath that burned. "Enjoy your feast. The most expensive dinner I've ever bought for you." Their confusion followed me down the hall. My heels clicked on the wooden floor, each step a heartbeat. When I reached the staircase, I stopped, staring at the photos on the wall, family portraits in golden frames. Nathan's graduation, the family trip to the coast, the baby pictures. None of them had me in them past the age of 12. I traced one with my fingertip, the dust catching the light like frost. Somewhere behind me, my mother began to cry. I didn't turn back. Upstairs, my old bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and old books. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop again, and stared at the blank screen. Outside, snow had begun to fall, slow and heavy, turning the neighborhood into a painting. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself, 32, successful, alone, and thought, this is what freedom looks like, quiet, cold, and earned. My phone vibrated on the desk. A message from Nathan, "You'll regret this." I typed a reply, then erased it. Some battles aren't worth the breath. I closed the laptop and lay back on the bed. The ceiling above me was cracked in a thin line from corner to corner, like a scar that never healed. I counted the seconds until the house went completely silent, until the only sound left was the wind against the window. And that was how it always began for me, silence first, then survival. I left the house before dawn. The air outside was brittle, the kind that cut through your coat no matter how tightly you wrapped it. The street was empty except for the faint hiss of sprinklers somewhere down the block. Behind me, the house glowed with the tired warmth of a fireplace that had burned too long. I stood on the driveway for a moment, my breath rising in small white clouds. My car was parked where it had always been, half under the maple tree that my father planted the year Nathan was born. The branches were bare now, skeletal, scraping the roof of the car whenever the wind moved. Inside the backseat, the catering boxes were still stacked neatly, half of the food untouched. I almost laughed. Thousands of dollars in truffle stuffing and herb-roasted turkey, now just silent witnesses to another Berry family disaster. I turned the key. The engine hummed, steady and low. For a second, I considered looking back. Instead, I shifted into gear and rolled down the street, the tires crunching over frost. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by darkness. It should have felt like freedom, but what filled me instead was that old familiar ache, the one that had followed me since childhood. The kind that lived just behind the ribs, whispering that maybe, no matter how far I drove, I would always be trying to leave the same place. When the city lights began to appear on the horizon, my phone started buzzing. First my mother, then my father, then Nathan. I didn't answer. The calls turned to messages. "Kira, we need to talk. You're being dramatic. Family is family. You'll regret this." I switched the phone to airplane mode and kept driving. By the time I reached Chicago, the sky had softened from black to pale gray. The skyline rose ahead like a jagged crown. My office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building near the river, quiet on holidays. When I stepped out of the elevator, the smell of paper and polish greeted me, sterile, safe, mine. The security lights cast everything in silver. I walked past the display cases filled with antique brooches and rings, each one cataloged, authenticated, and insured. Little worlds sealed behind glass. I made a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner and sat at my desk, staring at the city below. From up here, people looked like slow-moving stars. It was strange how success could feel both infinite and hollow. Every achievement shimmered like the jewels I appraised, brilliant from afar but cold to the touch. I closed my eyes, and for a moment the hum of the city faded into another sound entirely, the squeak of hospital floors. I was 9 again, sitting on a hard plastic chair, feet not touching the ground. Aunt Clara's voice murmured above me, soothing words I didn't understand. Through the glass window, I could see my mother bent over a tiny crib, her shoulders shaking with sobs. They said Nathan was too small, too fragile. I wanted to go inside to tell her I'd been good that day, that I'd cleaned my room and washed my hands twice. But the nurse stopped me. "No visitors," she said. "He can't risk infection." So I waited, hours, days, until waiting became who I was. A horn blared outside, dragging me back to the present. My coffee had gone cold. I set it aside and rubbed my temples. That night in the hospital had marked the beginning of a long education in invisibility. It taught me that silence could be mistaken for peace and distance for obedience. I opened my laptop, half expecting more messages, but there was nothing new. The inbox was a clean sheet, a luxury, really. I began to type a note to myself, something I'd started doing years ago whenever life tilted too sharply. Note 108, you survived the storm. You don't need to explain the lightning. I saved it, closed the lid, and leaned back. Through the window, dawn finally broke, thin, icy light spilling over the skyline. It touched the edges of my glass cases, making every diamond glint like a small sun. For the first time that night, I smiled. Later that morning, I drove to the lakefront. The air smelled of snow and iron. The water was still, dark, almost metallic in the early light. I walked along the pier until my fingers went numb. My grandmother used to bring me here when things got bad at home. She'd toss bread crumbs into the water and say, "See how the ducks come? Even the smallest offering brings company." She'd wink, pretending not to notice that I was crying. It had been years since I'd seen her. The last time was at my college graduation. She was the only family member who came. After the ceremony, she pressed a velvet pouch into my hand. Inside was an antique ring, emerald set in rose gold. "A little reminder," she said, "of where beauty hides." I wore it still, the stone dulled slightly by time. I turned it now, feeling the chill of the metal against my skin. Behind me, the city was waking up. Cars began to hum on Lake Shore Drive, and the sky shifted from gray to pale blue. I checked my watch, 7:42. I had meetings later, calls with clients in London, a shipment arriving from Antwerp. Life would continue, the way it always did. But tonight's silence would echo for a while. As I headed back to the car, snow started falling again, light, almost shy, as if the world itself was trying to erase what had happened. Each flake melted the instant it touched my skin. I thought about the dinner table, the faces twisted by greed and disbelief, the sound of my father's fist on the wood. And beneath all that noise, I remembered something smaller, the look in my mother's eyes right before I walked away. Not anger, not guilt, fear. It wasn't me she feared losing. It was control. That realization settled somewhere deep, like a weight sliding into place. The fear that had kept me tethered to them for decades finally shifted into something else, clarity. By the time I reached my office again, the day had fully begun. I wiped the snow from my coat and sat down at my desk. My reflection stared back at me from the glass of the display case, a woman both familiar and foreign. I whispered to her, almost amused, "They'll come for you again. And this time, you'll be ready." I opened my notebook and wrote one more line beneath the earlier note. Note 109, freedom doesn't arrive with a door slam. It starts with the silence that follows. Outside, the river gleamed under the weak winter sun, and the world kept moving as if nothing had collapsed. But something had changed, something small, quiet, irreversible. The night after the dinner, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan's face, wide with triumph, like he'd won some invisible war. The city outside my window blinked and shimmered, lights flickering off the river, but inside my apartment was still. I kept replaying the word my father had used, obligation. It had a weight to it, heavy and sticky, the kind that clings to your bones long after it's spoken. I made tea just to have something to hold. The steam curled against my face, sharp with ginger and lemon. I stared at the faint reflection of myself in the window glass. My eyes looked older than I remembered. Somewhere beneath all that calm, the memories began to move again, like ghosts that had just been waiting for the lights to go out. The first time I realized silence could be a weapon, I was 10. My brother had knocked over a bottle of disinfectant in the nursery. The smell of alcohol filled the air, thick and dizzying. My mother rushed in, panicked. Nathan was crying, his small body trembling. "It was her," he said between sobs, his finger pointed at me like a knife. Kira dropped it. I hadn't even been in the room, but my mother didn't ask. She just looked at me, her eyes full of something worse than anger, disappointment. "Out," she said, voice low. "Go to your room." That night, I learned something essential. Truth doesn't matter when the story is already written. I used to think things would get better when Nathan grew stronger, when Mom could finally breathe without counting his heartbeats. But it never happened. Her fear simply changed shape. When he started school, she worried about infections, bruises, bullies. When he turned 13, she worried about his moods, his friends, his future. And through it all, I became the constant background noise, the easy silence she could ignore. By high school, I had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. I would come home from debate club, medals clinking faintly in my backpack, and find the living room filled with laughter. My parents and Nathan watching TV, sharing popcorn, the same couch where I used to sit. I'd hover by the door for a moment, waiting for someone to notice. No one ever did, so I went upstairs and learned how to celebrate quietly. My victories became whispers, a perfect score on a test, a scholarship letter, the acceptance email that made me cry into my pillow. They never saw any of it. I didn't hate Nathan. I envied him, yes, but mostly I envied the simplicity of his world, the assurance that no matter what he did, someone would always be there to catch him. One afternoon, when I was 16, I came home early. The house smelled like bleach and lavender. From the kitchen, I heard voices, my parents talking in that hushed tone adults use when they think you're not listening. "She's so distant lately," my father said. "She's a teenager," my mother sighed. "But she'll be fine. She's not like Nathan. She doesn't need as much attention." I remember standing there, my backpack still on, realizing that fine was just another word for forgotten. After that day, I stopped waiting for them to look up. I poured everything into grades, work, control, things that could not abandon me. I got a job at a cafe near school, just to have somewhere else to exist. The owner, Mrs. Patel, was kind in the effortless way some people are. She always saved the corner table for me during breaks, called me Kirajai in her sing-song accent. She taught me that a cup of coffee could mean many things: comfort, escape, sometimes even courage. When my grandmother Evelyn visited one summer, she found me working behind the counter. Her silver hair glinted under the yellow lights. She ordered a cappuccino, sipped it, and said, "You've grown into your silence." I laughed awkwardly, not sure what she meant. She looked around the cafe, her eyes lingering on the antique clock by the door. "Do you know how to tell if something old is worth keeping?" she asked. I shook my head. She smiled, soft but sharp. "By the way it endures time without losing itself." That sentence stayed with me. It was the first time anyone had suggested that endurance could be beautiful. After work, she drove me home in her old blue car, humming some tune I didn't recognize. At a red light, she reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small jewelry box. Inside was a hairpin, delicately carved, faint traces of pearls clinging to the silver. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," she said. "It's not perfect anymore, but that doesn't make it worthless." When I held it, the metal felt alive, as if it remembered every hand that had touched it. That was the beginning, before degrees, before the auction houses, before the money. That moment when I realized that value wasn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it hid in cracks and scars. That night after she left, I sat by my window and examined the hairpin under a flashlight. The light refracted through the tiny imperfections like stars through fog. I didn't know it then, but I was already falling in love with the quiet gleam of forgotten things. Years later, when I walked into the Chicago office of the auction house for the first time, I thought of that moment. The same feeling rose in my chest, awe mixed with defiance. The world had tried to make me invisible, but here, surrounded by objects that had outlived centuries, invisibility finally meant something sacred. I sipped the rest of my tea, cold now, and smiled faintly. Maybe silence was what broke me. Maybe it was what kept me alive. I set the cup down and glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. The city was finally quiet enough to breathe. I slipped the hairpin, Evelyn's gift, into my palm and let the cool metal rest against my skin. The edges still caught the light, faint but steady. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the forgotten child anymore. I felt like something rare, something that had endured time without losing itself. When I think back to the years that followed, I remember them not as a sequence of days, but as a slow unraveling. Each morning, the house felt a little emptier. My mother's voice, once soft with worry, became sharp with exhaustion. My father spent more time at work. Nathan grew taller, louder, bolder, and I grew quieter. I learned how to make my presence small, footsteps light, breath held, emotions folded neatly away. I became an expert at erasing myself. It's strange how invisibility can become a habit. It's like holding your breath for so long that you forget what air feels like. By the time senior year arrived, I was living two separate lives. At school, I was Kira Berry, the straight-A student, captain of the debate team, the girl whose essays made teachers nod with pride. At home, I was simply background noise, the daughter who forgot to exist. Every evening, I'd listen to the laughter drifting from Nathan's room. His friends came over often, boys who teased me kindly but never noticed how rarely I laughed back. They called me the quiet sister, and the name stuck like dust on glass. The only place that ever felt like mine was Grandma Evelyn's house. It sat on the edge of town, surrounded by tall oak trees that creaked when the wind changed. Inside, the air smelled of old books, rose oil, and time. She kept her jewelry in wooden boxes lined with faded velvet, each one labeled in her spidery handwriting. Art Deco, circa 1925. Victorian mourning brooch. Baroque revival. Every object had a story, and she told them as if they were fairy tales. "This ring," she'd say, holding it up to the light, "was once mistaken for glass by a careless appraiser. It spent 40 years in a drawer before someone realized it was a rare spinel. Moral of the story? Don't let anyone else tell you what you're worth." I loved her for that. She never asked me to speak, but she always listened, to the silence between my words, to the hesitation in my smile. With her, my quiet didn't feel like failure. It felt like language. When she fell ill, I started visiting every weekend. I'd sit beside her bed while she dozed, polishing her old pieces with a soft cloth. She'd wake occasionally, half smiling. "You have steady hands," she whispered once. "The kind that see truth better than noise." The day she died, I was 17. The house was filled with relatives I barely knew, their condolences rehearsed and hollow. While everyone talked about inheritance and funeral flowers, I slipped upstairs to her study. Her desk smelled faintly of cedar. On it sat a small envelope with my name written in her handwriting, elegant and sure. Inside was a note and a key. "For the day you decide to stop apologizing for shining. The key is to the world, not the box." I never found out what box she meant. Maybe she was speaking in riddles, as she often did. But the words burned into me. Stop apologizing for shining. A week later, I received the scholarship letter from the University of Michigan, full tuition, housing, books, everything. I remember reading it on the porch while the autumn leaves swirled around my feet. My mother came out, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Michigan?" she asked, frowning. "That's so far." "I know," I said. "That's the point," she sighed. "Nathan will miss you." Behind her, through the kitchen window, I could see Nathan playing video games. He didn't even glance up. "Sure," I said quietly. "He'll survive." No one offered to drive me on move-in day. My father said he was too busy, my mother said the timing was bad, and Nathan didn't say anything at all. So Aunt Clara came instead. She loaded my boxes into her small car, humming along to old country songs. Before we left, she handed me a white envelope. "It's from your grandmother," she said. "She asked me to keep it until today." Inside was a check, $500, and a folded piece of paper. "For your first piece." There was also a tiny tag, the kind used for jewelry blank except for a single engraved number. 1. I didn't understand what she meant until years later. The drive to Michigan felt endless. The world outside the window shifted from city gray to fields of gold, then to forests heavy with rain. Aunt Clara talked the whole way, filling the car with the warmth my own mother never could. When we reached the campus, she hugged me tightly. "Don't look back too much, okay? Sometimes you can't build a new life while staring at the old one." I smiled, pretending not to cry. "I'll try." That night, in the dorm room that smelled faintly of new paint and hope, I unpacked Grandma's note and taped it to the wall above my desk. The key rested beside it, glinting under the cheap lamplight. I didn't know what I was unlocking yet, but I knew this. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't empty. It was waiting. University life was noise and motion, a rhythm I wasn't used to, but I adapted quickly. I learned to speak when I had something worth saying, and people began to listen. My professors noticed. My classmates admired my calm. They called it confidence. I called it survival refined. During my sophomore year, I took an elective in art history. The unit on decorative arts changed everything. One afternoon, the professor brought in a small chest of replicas, Renaissance cameos, Georgian lockets, Victorian mourning rings. I recognized their styles instantly. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice naming each era. When the professor asked for volunteers to catalog the collection, my hand rose before I could stop it. That day, as I worked under the museum lights, something inside me clicked. It felt like returning to a language I had once known fluently. By graduation, I had mapped out my path: jewelry authentication, the study of truth in beauty, proof through precision. It was the perfect field for someone who had spent her whole life proving she wasn't invisible. The day I received my degree, I stood in line among hundreds of other graduates, the tassel of my cap brushing my cheek. I searched the crowd automatically, though I already knew what I wouldn't find. My parents hadn't come. Nathan hadn't come. But near the back of the hall, I spotted a familiar figure, silver hair, kind eyes, leaning on a cane. Aunt Clara. When they called my name, she stood and clapped, loud and unashamed. For once, the sound didn't make me flinch. After the ceremony, she hugged me tightly. "Your grandmother would be proud." "I hope so," I said. As we parted, she pressed something into my hand, a business card for an auction house in Chicago. "They're looking for an assistant appraiser. You have the eye for it." The card felt warm in my palm. I looked at the name printed in gold letters and smiled. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat on the floor with my suitcase half-packed. The city hummed beyond the window, restless and alive. I placed Grandma's key on the table beside the envelope labeled 1. It struck me then, she hadn't given me money to spend. She'd given me permission to begin. I whispered into the empty room, "All right, Grandma, let's see where this leads." And with that, I closed the suitcase, ready to meet the world on my own terms. The first thing I noticed about the Chicago auction house wasn't the grandeur, it was the smell. Not perfume, not polish. It smelled of paper, metal, and a faint trace of dust that never quite left even after years of cleaning. The kind of smell that whispered history lives here. I was 22 and terrified. The marble lobby stretched high above me, ceilings glittering with chandeliers that looked like frozen rain. People moved with purpose, heels tapping, voices low, clipboards pressed to their chests. Every sound seemed measured, deliberate. I stood at the reception desk clutching my portfolio, trying not to wrinkle my blazer. The woman behind the counter barely looked up. "Name? Kira Berry." She flipped through a list, nodded once, and pointed to a hallway lined with glass cases. "Second door on the right, you're the new assistant." The title sounded temporary, disposable. Still, I smiled. "Thank you." The office of my direct supervisor, Mr. Lancaster, was a study in symmetry, books arranged by color, pens aligned with military precision. He didn't stand when I entered. His glasses caught the light as he scanned my resume. "University of Michigan, full scholarship," he murmured. "Impressive, but this job isn't about grades, Ms. Berry, it's about instinct." "Yes, sir," I said. He gestured toward a tray of assorted jewelry on his desk. "Tell me which piece doesn't belong." There were 6 items: a diamond brooch, 2 rings, a pair of pearl earrings, a pendant, and a bracelet. I bent closer, pulse steady. The diamonds in the brooch reflected clean, white light too clean. The prongs were slightly uneven, the metal too light. "This one," I said, pointing at the brooch. "It's a reproduction, mid-century alloy, not platinum. The cut's wrong for Edwardian." Lancaster looked up, finally meeting my eyes. Something unreadable flickered there. "You may sit down." That was the beginning. For months, I lived between deadlines and display lights. My world reduced to magnifying lenses, calibration scales, and the hum of fluorescent lamps. I learned how to read hallmarks like fingerprints, how to hear authenticity in the sound of metal against glass. I also learned how invisible assistants could be. When clients visited, Lancaster took the credit. When pieces sold, he gave the speeches. I stayed in the background, smiling politely, my name omitted from every catalog. It didn't bother me at first. I was used to shadows, they felt safe, familiar. But late at night, after the last visitor had gone, I'd linger by the glass cases, studying the jewels under the dim emergency lights. They were stunning in stillness. Each gem caught the faintest glimmer and held it hostage. It reminded me of something my grandmother once said: "Glass shines too, but it breaks easier." Some nights I couldn't tell which one I was. My apartment was a tiny studio above a bakery. The air always smelled of sugar and yeast, and the walls trembled whenever the mixers started downstairs. I didn't mind. The noise meant someone else was awake. I'd sit by the window polishing small antique finds from flea markets, cheap things with potential. It wasn't about profit, it was about practice. Every clasp I fixed, every stone I cleaned, made me feel closer to her. One rainy Friday, Lancaster handed me a stack of evaluation reports. "We're behind schedule," he said without looking up. "Start cataloging these. Most are costume pieces from estate sales, junk really." I nodded and carried the box to my desk. The jewelry was tangled together, a mess of faded gold and tarnished silver. I sorted through mechanically until one piece caught my eye, a brooch shaped like a crescent moon, its surface worn smooth. At first glance it looked fake, rhinestones set in brass, but the weight was wrong. Heavier. Curious, I took out my loupe and peered closer. Beneath layers of grime, delicate engravings shimmered faintly. There, a tiny hallmark near the clasp, almost invisible. My heart skipped. I recognized the symbol from one of my grandmother's old books, a 19th century Parisian jeweler whose pieces were thought lost. I spent the weekend researching. Old auction archives, dusty catalog scans, any mention of the maker's mark. By Sunday night, my desk was covered in notes and half-drunk cups of coffee. The evidence lined up perfectly. The junk brooch was authentic, worth tens of thousands. On Monday morning, I presented my findings to Lancaster. My voice shook, but my hands didn't. He examined the documents in silence. "You're certain?" "Yes." He pressed his lips together, thinking, "Leave the report on my desk." 2 days later, he called a staff meeting to announce the discovery. The room erupted in applause. "A remarkable find," he declared. "Our team's diligence has paid off." He never said my name. Afterward, colleagues patted his shoulder, congratulated him, admired his expertise. I stood at the back, invisible once again, but that night something shifted. As I walked past the glass cases, I caught my reflection, a faint figure surrounded by glittering fragments. For the first time, the image didn't comfort me. It enraged me. I wasn't glass. I wasn't meant to shatter quietly. That realization settled inside me like a heartbeat. Over the following months, my attention sharpened. I double-checked every file, every appraisal, every overlooked trinket that crossed my desk. Clients began to notice. They asked almost casually, "Could Ms. Berry take a look?" Lancaster didn't like that. I could feel his patience thinning. One afternoon, he stopped by my desk, arms crossed. "You're making me look careless," he said, half smiling. "Just doing my job," I replied. His smile froze. "Know your place, Kira?" I did, but I also knew I wouldn't stay there. That night, back in my apartment, I took out the envelope marked 1 and the old hairpin. I placed them side by side. The paper had yellowed, but the ink remained bold. Maybe this was what Grandma meant. The key wasn't for a box. It was for a door I hadn't dared to open. I traced the edge of the hairpin, its cool surface grounding me. The city outside glowed through the rain, each droplet refracting light like tiny diamonds. In that reflection, I saw a woman no longer content to be unseen. The storm finally broke the next week. It did not arrive with thunder. It came as a whisper. A private collector arrived unannounced just before closing. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like a secret and spoke in the careful sentences of men who are used to being believed. He set a velvet pouch on my desk and asked for Mr. Lancaster. "He is unavailable," I said. "I can take a preliminary look." He studied my face, weighing the risk, then nodded. Inside the pouch lay a ring that did not want to be touched. The gold was soft with age. The stone glowed the way coals do when they are almost out and will not die. Garnet, I thought, but not ordinary. I lifted the loupe to my eye and the world narrowed to facets and fire and a small garden of scratches that told the truth about time. The pavilion was deep, the table slightly off. Old cut, pre-standardization. The shoulders of the band had been reworked by a careful but impatient hand. There, beneath the grime, a micro-engraving, not a hallmark, a signature. I felt it then, that quiet click inside my chest, the lock turning for the right key. I asked the man if he would mind waiting 15 minutes. He agreed, amused. I ran to the archives, a long, narrow room that smelled of dust and decisions. My fingers flew along spines of catalog books until they found a name I had only seen once in my grandmother's notes. A minor Viennese maker who exported to Paris for 3 seasons and then vanished into history. The engraving matched. I returned to the desk with the book open to the page. The collector leaned in. His expression shifted by degrees from politeness to curiosity to something like hunger. "Where did you learn to see that?" he asked. I wanted to say a kitchen table, a hairpin, a woman who spoke to me like I was not made of air. Instead I said practice. He laughed softly. Then he asked for a formal report in his name and only his, confidential. I wrote it that night with the care of someone writing a final letter. I documented the cut, the flaws, the signature, the provenance I could trace, the gaps I could not fill, and the reasons the gaps existed. When I finished, I sat for a long time with my hands folded, afraid to touch anything else in case the feeling left. Lancaster signed the certificate in the morning. He did not look at me. The sale that followed made the newsletter. The buyer sent a case of champagne. Lancaster took the applause, the calls, the compliments. I took the quiet and put it somewhere safe. Word moved the way it always does in small, powerful circles, discreetly, inevitably. Clients began to request me by name using the language of discretion. Would Ms. Barry be available for a second opinion? Could Ms. Barry perform the preliminary inspection? Only if Ms. Barry has time. The first time a client corrected the receptionist when she offered Lancaster, the receptionist glanced at me with a look I had never seen on her face before. Respect looks a little like surprise when you are not used to it. I kept my head down. I said little. I worked. That winter, an estate arrived from a family whose last name opened doors in 3 capitals. There were trunks of small things and 1 mahogany case of large ones. The large ones had already been catalogued by a famous European appraiser. The small things were considered charming. I was assigned the charming things. It felt like an insult and a gift. Inside a velvet tray, I found a locket that had been loved so hard the gold had thinned at the edges. The hinge fought me politely, then surrendered. The interior held 2 tiny portraits that had faded into sepia ghosts. The clasp bore a mark that did not belong to the rest of the piece. Someone had repaired it a very long time ago with a replacement that told a different story. The photograph behind the second portrait had been cut down from a larger print. Its corner showed a sliver of something stamped in blue. A customs mark, not domestic. I spent 2 nights building a small bridge between eras. The locket was a marriage of 2 histories, one hiding inside the other. The lesser part had been catalogued. The more important part slept behind the portrait, thin as breath and easy to miss if you did not respect what paper can survive. I traced the customs stamp to a shipment list in a port ledger that should have been boring but was not. The locket had crossed oceans twice. The second journey mattered more than the first. The report turned a charming trinket into a centerpiece. The insurance values multiplied. The family sent a handwritten note. Lancaster sent a terse email. Keep me informed of any external correspondence. Ensure you copy me on future discoveries. Know your lane. I knew it all right. I knew it so completely that I could feel its walls pressing against my shoulders. A week later, I stayed late to finalize a catalog on a winter sale. The building went quiet in the way large buildings do, like a theater after the last audience has gone. Cleaning crews moved in gentle lines. Somewhere in the distance, a vacuum sang a tired hymn. I finished the last lot description and closed my laptop. The city beyond the windows was a map of lights and possible futures. I took out the envelope labeled number 001. The paper had softened at the folds, like skin at a scar. I set the hairpin beside it and waited for courage to arrive. It did not arrive dramatically. It came as a simple thought. No one is going to call you forward. You will have to walk. I wrote a resignation letter that night and saved it in drafts. I gave myself a month. In that month, I collected 3 quiet promises from 3 quiet clients. If you ever go independent, call me first. I asked a friend in logistics about secure shipping insurance. I learned what a short-term lease costs in neighborhoods people called up and coming with a smile that meant cheaper than elegance. On a Saturday morning, the bakery mixers downstairs shook dust from my ceiling. I packed my few things into 2 cardboard boxes and a backpack. I wore the ring my grandmother had given me, the emerald dulled by years and still alive. When I reached the office, I printed the letter, placed it on Lancaster's desk, and stood a moment in the doorway remembering the girl who had walked in here pretending not to be afraid. I wished her well. Lancaster called me before lunch. His voice was warm in the way winter sun is warm through glass. "I am surprised," he said. I told him I was grateful. He asked if the timing could be adjusted to benefit the upcoming sales. I told him I would finish the catalog and leave at the end of the week. He told me independence is harder than it looks. I told him invisibility is heavier than it sounds. He did not reply to that. I left the building lighter than I had entered it on my first day. Fear trailed me for a block and then gave up. The space I could afford was on the second floor above a noodle shop where steam curled out of the kitchen vent like messages I could not read. The walls were the color of old envelopes. The floor creaked in friendly protest. The windows stuck in the winter and side open in the spring. I bought a folding table from a thrift store and a chair that wobbled unless you sat just so. I brought in a lamp that cast a small, honest circle of light. On the first morning, I made coffee on a machine that argued with me and lost. I placed the hairpin at the corner of the table like a compass. Then I wrote my company name on a piece of paper and propped it against a cup. It looked like pretend. It felt like home. Work arrived slowly at first. A dealer who could not afford the house rates. A widow who did not trust the house smiles. A museum intern who had heard about the girl with the eye. I priced fairly and wrote reports as if each were a map someone would need to cross a dangerous place in the dark. I added photographs and context and the kind of sentences I wish someone had written for me when I was young and unsure. One afternoon, a courier brought a parcel from the collector with the Viennese ring. Inside was a small box and a note. For the one who saw. The box held a loupe with a better lens than mine and a check for an amount that made me sit down. I wrote back with care. Gratitude is a language. Use it well. By spring, the circle of light on my table had widened. I hired a part-time assistant, a recent graduate named Jenny who listened more than she spoke and took notes like a biographer. She had the steadiness I recognized. I told her on the first day that our job was to tell the truth about beautiful things. She smiled as if that was the only job worth having. Not every day was triumphant. Some days were a stack of costume brooches that would never be more than what they were. Some days were clients who wanted a different truth than the one in the metal. Some days were invoices and insurance and the mathematics of staying alive. But there were also days when a piece arrived that made the room hold its breath. Late one evening, I opened a box of mixed estate items and found a pendant hidden under a tangle of chains. The chain that held it was wrong for it, too new and too bright. The pendant itself was a small oval set with a stone so dark it looked like captive night. Under the loop, the surface revealed tiny, careful abrasions from a tool no longer used. I tilted it to the lamp and saw a whisper of silk within the black. Obsidian cameo, high relief, late 18th century, carved by a hand that understood grief. I placed it upright and watched the face inside resolve from shadow. It was the profile of a woman with a wreath in her hair and a gaze that did not belong to the living. Mourning jewelry, love that refuses to stop speaking. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature. The invoice value was negligible. The real value was not. I wrote the report through midnight. When I finished, I closed my eyes and saw the Thanksgiving table, the candles, the number on the screen, the open mouths. I breathed in and let it go. The past did not disappear. It receded, like a tide that has finally given up on drowning the shore. Before I left for the night, I taped a new note to the wall beside the first. Note number 110. Recognition is just another kind of glass. Do not live behind it. I turned off the lamp. The room fell into a soft blue half-dark. From below, the noodle shop sent up the scent of star anise and pepper. I locked the door and stood for a moment in the hallway listening to the pipes clatter like an old house clearing its throat. On the way home, the city wore its lights like jewelry. Some of it was real. Some of it was glass. All of it shimmered. And for the first time, the weight on my chest was not the weight of being unseen. It was the weight of something precious resting exactly where it belonged. The first morning I woke up in my new office, the ceiling was already talking. Pipes knocked like impatient ghosts, and the smell of soy sauce drifted through the floorboards. Somewhere below, someone was shouting an order in Mandarin, the clang of the wok like a heartbeat I hadn't known I missed. This was the sound of beginning again. The place wasn't much, 2 windows that refused to open at the same time, a floor that tilted slightly east, a flickering bulb that buzzed like a trapped bee. But when I turned on the desk lamp and the circle of light bloomed across the scratched table, I felt the same pulse I had the day I left home. Fear braided with freedom. I brewed coffee that tasted faintly of cardboard, sat down, and stared at the folded sheet of paper where I had written the company's name, Berry Authentic, and the letters were uneven. My handwriting had never been graceful. Still, seeing it there, real, made my hands tremble a little. By noon, the street outside was awake, delivery trucks, bicycles, laughter. My inbox was not. 0 messages. I took that as permission to start somewhere small. The first client came 2 days later, a woman named Mrs. Davenport who carried a velvet pouch like it contained her heartbeat. Inside was a wedding ring her late husband had bought at a flea market decades ago. She wanted to know if it was worth anything. I examined it under the lamp. The gold was thin, worn nearly white along the edges. But beneath the scratches were markings that told a better story, faint French assay stamps, turn of the century. I told her it was modest in money but rich in memory. She smiled through tears. That's enough worth for me. When she left, I wrote her invoice for $50 and felt wealthier than I ever had at the auction house. More work followed, tiny, inconsistent waves. A pawnbroker who'd been fooled once too often. A museum intern needing guidance. A retired teacher who wanted to catalog her costume jewelry before the world forgets it. Each piece taught me patience. Each client taught me humility. At night, when the city lights stitched themselves across the windows, I'd spread the day's findings on the table. Trinkets, stones, fragments of other people's lives. I'd photograph them carefully, document them as if they were royal relics. In a way, they were. Every scratch meant someone had chosen to keep going. The noise from the restaurant below became a kind of comfort. The chefs sang along to old pop songs, the delivery bell chimed, laughter rose like steam. Sometimes I imagined Grandma Evelyn sitting across from me, nodding approvingly, her ring catching the lamplight. One Thursday evening, a delivery courier brought an unfamiliar envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Heard you've started your own shop. I might have something you'd enjoy evaluating. A friend of a friend, no name. Just an address in an upscale neighborhood and a date. Saturday, 10 a.m. I hesitated, then curiosity won. The apartment belonged to a collector named Mr. Hayes. Every wall was covered in art that didn't match, modern abstracts beside faded portraits, a gallery of contradictions. On a coffee table sat a locked silver box. It's a family piece, he said, handing me the key. I've been told it's worthless. I'd like a second opinion. Inside lay a necklace of moonstones, the clasp repaired crudely with solder. To most, it would look broken. But the stones had that milky fire that only natural moonstones carry, and the clasp, though clumsy, was engraved with a signature I recognized, the same Parisian maker as my first discovery at the auction house. I felt my throat tight. You were told wrong, I said. Mr. Hayes smiled like someone who already knew the answer. Then let's see what the world says, shall we? We arranged for an authentication report and auction listing. When the sale concluded 2 weeks later, the necklace fetched more than any piece I'd handled before. My commission check was enough to pay 6 months, rent in advance. I celebrated with takeout noodles eaten straight from the box at my desk. The lamp flickered, the building groaned, and I laughed out loud. Success didn't roar. It simmered. As weeks passed, the jobs multiplied. Word traveled quietly through collectors and curators about a young woman above a noodle shop who treated every object like a confession. Some came to test me, to see if the rumors were true. They left with respect. Still, not everything glittered. There were nights when invoices went unpaid, when the cold crept in because the heater refused to cooperate, when I questioned whether independence was bravery or stubbornness wearing makeup. During one of those nights, Jenny appeared, a fresh graduate with nervous eyes and a notebook bigger than her confidence. She had emailed asking for an internship in anything to do with truth and beauty. I hired her on the spot. She arrived each morning with coffee and a curiosity that reminded me painfully of myself at 22. Watching her study gemstones with her brow furrowed, I realized I was no longer just building a business. I was building continuity. One rainy afternoon, she asked, "Why do you never display your certificates or awards?" "Because paper fades," I said, "but reputation doesn't if you guard it." She nodded as if writing that down somewhere in her mind. When I locked up that evening, the street was slick with rain. The neon sign from the noodle shop reflected on the wet pavement, bright red, like a heartbeat pulsing under the city's skin. I paused at the door, listening to the sizzling pans, the clatter, the laughter below. For the first time in years, the noise didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like life. And somewhere between the scent of sesame oil and the glow of streetlights, I realized the silence I had carried for so long had finally turned into music. By spring, the city had thawed, and so had my luck. The first few clients had become messengers, whispering my name to others like a secret too valuable to keep. The phone rang more often. The email inbox no longer looked like a desert. Jenny and I built a rhythm that felt almost like music. She handled schedules and deliveries, I handled the pieces themselves. Our days were measured in light, morning pale gold through the window, noon silver on the desk, evening amber in the lamp's circle. Sometimes we worked without speaking for hours, the quiet filled only by the hum of concentration. One afternoon, she looked up from her notes. "Do you ever miss the big place?" I thought of the auction house, the cold marble, the sound of heels echoing, the way voices dropped when I entered a room I had already earned. I shook my head. "I miss the chandeliers," I said, smiling. "Not the shadows." We laughed softly. The noodles downstairs sizzled, and the air smelled of chili oil and achievement. The work kept coming. An engagement ring from a family divorce, a tiara from a small-town museum, an estate lot with an unsigned sapphire brooch that turned out to be worth 6 figures. I treated each one like a living thing. When I held a gemstone, I thought about its history, the pressure that made it, the heat, the time, how much it had to endure before anyone ever called it beautiful. In a way, it was the same story as mine. Then one day, something unusual arrived. A messenger brought a velvet-lined case with no sender listed, just a folded letter. For Ms. Kira Berry. A private evaluation requested. The item carries sentimental value. Inside was a brooch shaped like a violet, its petals carved from mother-of-pearl. The clasp was slightly rusted, but the detail, so fine, so precise, it stopped me cold. I'd seen this engraving before, not in a textbook, not at the auction house, at my grandmother. The tiny maker's mark on the clasp, the same curling initials that had been etched into the hairpin she once gave me. My throat tightened. I held the brooch under the lamp and felt the years collapse in a single breath. Could it be from the same artisan, or could it be hers? I flipped it over. There was a faint inscription almost worn away, E.W. Evelyn White. I sat very still. "Jenny," I said quietly, "do you believe in coincidences?" She looked up from her notebook. "Not in your line of work." I smiled faintly. "Good answer." I ran tests, cleaned it gently, traced its provenance as far as the records would allow. It had passed through an estate sale in New York decades ago, purchased by an anonymous buyer. Before that, it had been registered to a small gallery in London, one that had long since closed. The paperwork listed the original consignor as E. White. For the first time in years, I didn't know whether to feel grateful or haunted. That night I stayed long after Jenny left. The restaurant below had closed, leaving behind the scent of smoke and ginger. I turned the brooch in my hands under the lamplight. The violet shimmered like something alive. Maybe Grandma had sold it. Maybe she had lost it. Maybe she had wanted it to find me. I opened the drawer where I kept the hairpin and laid them side by side. The marks matched. The same artist, the same hands, maybe the same story unfinished. I remembered the letter she'd left me. The key is to the world, not the box. Was this what she meant? That her world was hidden in mine, waiting for me to notice? I drafted a report that night but didn't send it. Some truths weren't for clients. Some were just for keeping. In the weeks that followed, the business grew faster than I could have imagined. Collectors from other cities started calling. A gallery in New York offered collaboration. A museum curator in Miami asked for consultation. Jenny and I barely kept up. We moved out of the noodle shop in late autumn. I remember standing in the empty room for the last time, the windows open, the smell of sesame oil fading into the cold. On the table, I left a note. "Thank you for holding me until I could stand on my own." Our new office had real walls and working heat, but I missed the sounds from below, the clatter, the laughter, the proof that life kept moving even when mine felt paused. Still, when I unlocked the new glass door with my company's name etched cleanly across it, I felt something close to pride. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that knows exactly what it took to exist. At the opening, Jenny handed me a small box tied with silver ribbon. "A gift," she said. Inside was a framed photo of the old office, the folding table, the lamp, the crooked window, the paper sign with our name written by hand. "I thought we should never forget where we started," she said. I smiled, feeling the sting of tears. We won't. That night, after everyone left, I turned off the lights and looked at the city through the glass. Chicago glittered like a field of scattered diamonds. I touched the violet brooch pinned inside my jacket and whispered to the darkness, "I found you." The air felt heavy, full of promise and history. Maybe this was how legacy worked, not through inheritance but through rediscovery. Maybe Grandma Evelyn had never really left anything behind. She had simply hidden her world inside mine, trusting I would have the eyes to see it. And I did. The invitation arrived in late November, printed on heavy cream paper as if formality could erase the past. Thanksgiving dinner, home at 7. My first instinct was to ignore it. The second was curiosity. 2 years had passed since that night, the night of the $12 million revelation, and silence had grown between us like ivy, creeping and unkillable. I told myself I was attending out of civility, not forgiveness. But when the day came, I stood in front of my closet for nearly an hour deciding what armor to wear. In the end, I chose simplicity. Black dress, pearl earrings, the violet brooch pinned discreetly inside my coat. Driving back felt like traveling through a tunnel carved out of memory. The same streets, the same mailbox leaning slightly to the right, even the porch light flickering as if waiting for me. My mother opened the door. Time had carved fine lines around her mouth, but her eyes were still the same, searching, cautious. "Kira," she said, half relief, half disbelief. "You came." "Only for dinner," I replied. The house smelled of cinnamon and tension. The table was set too perfectly, as if symmetry could disguise discomfort. Nathan sat at the end, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to notice me. My father poured wine with a precision that looked rehearsed. We ate in silence for the first 10 minutes. Forks clinked, conversation skirted safe topics, traffic, weather, the neighbor's new car. It felt like sitting in a museum display titled Family, Circa Truce. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We're glad you could join us, it's been a while." 2 years, I said. He nodded, taking a long sip of wine. "You've done well for yourself, we've seen the articles." My mother's smile was thin. "Yes, your company seems very successful." I could hear the unspoken without us. Nathan looked up, smirking. "So, millionaire and still single?" I raised an eyebrow. "Still underachieving and still talking." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My father exhaled through his nose. Nathan laughed once, low and humorless. "You haven't changed," he said. "I have," I answered. "You just can't see past your reflection." He leaned back. "What's that supposed to mean?" I gestured to the mirror behind him, an antique piece that used to hang in Grandma Evelyn's house before my mother redecorated. The glass had cracked in one corner, thin as a vein. "That mirror has watched all of us pretend for years. Tonight it must be exhausted." My mother's voice rose, brittle. "Kira, please." But the words were already spilling out, slow and calm, like water finding its level. "I came here because I wanted to see if anything was different, to see if gratitude means anything to this family beyond what can be measured in dollars." My father's jaw tightened. "Don't lecture us about gratitude. You turned your back on your own blood." "I turned my back on being used," I said. "There's a difference." The room went still again. The clock ticked once, loud enough to make everyone flinch. Then, unexpectedly, my mother began to cry, not the polite tears of guilt, but something rawer. "I didn't know how to love you both," she whispered. "Nathan needed everything. You never asked for anything. I thought that meant you were fine." Her words landed like stones dropped into deep water. I wanted to be cruel. I wanted to say that her ignorance had cost me years of silence. Looking at her trembling hands, I saw a woman still trapped in the cage she built for herself, fear of loss disguised as love. "You could have asked," I said softly. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "Would you have answered?" I hesitated. The truth was complicated. Maybe not then, but I would have tried. Nathan shifted, restless. "Are we done with the emotional TED Talk? Because if this is about guilt, I'm fresh out." I turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Do you ever think about what you took that night?" He frowned. "What, the laptop drama again?" "No," I said. "The last chance for any of us to be honest." He looked away. His reflection in the cracked mirror seemed older, meaner. My father stood suddenly, pushing back his chair. "Enough, we didn't invite you to reopen wounds." "Then why did you?" No one answered. The lights flickered once, the house sighing in the wind outside. I realized then that this dinner wasn't about reconciliation, it was about curiosity. They wanted to see if I was still theirs to command, even in apology. I placed my napkin on the plate. "Thank you for dinner." My mother reached for me, but I stepped back. "Kira, wait, there's something you should know." Her voice broke, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. "About your grandmother." I froze. "What about her?" She left something, a letter. I found it after she died, but I didn't understand it. It mentioned you. The room tilted. Where is it? My mother looked toward Nathan. He stood slowly, guilt flickering across his face like bad lighting. I had it, but it went missing. My heartbeat stumbled. Missing? He nodded. Years ago, I sold some things from Grandma's house, didn't think they were important. The air left the room. My father swore under his breath. My mother buried her face in her hands. I wanted to scream, to reach across the table and shake him until he understood what he'd done. But I didn't move. Instead, I said quietly, "Then I guess I'll find it myself." The mirror behind him caught my reflection and his side by side, two people born from the same house, one chained to its history, the other walking away from it. Without another word, I picked up my coat, the violet brooch glinting like a heartbeat, and walked into the cold night. Outside, the wind smelled of frost and unfinished stories. The headlights from passing cars flashed across the snow, carving brief, bright lines that disappeared as quickly as they came. I drove back toward the city, the steering wheel steady beneath my hands, and told myself that if a letter existed, it would find me the way everything else from her had. Quietly, precisely, right when I needed it most. I spent the next morning revisiting every corner of the house I had once known, as if the walls themselves might whisper the secret. The attic was dusty, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I moved boxes, lifted old photo albums, checked every drawer I could remember. Nothing. My mother hovered behind me, timid. "Kira, you don't have to." "I do," I said. Her hesitation was familiar, the same voice that had told me to disappear as a child. I had learned long ago that hesitation is often a form of honesty. Hours passed. Sunlight slanted through the small attic window, catching on cobwebs, illuminating dust like tiny stars. I lifted a bundle of papers tied with ribbon. Most were bills, letters, school certificates, nothing remarkable, until I saw a small envelope with my name in faded ink, Kira Berry. My heart stuttered. I carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable, my grandmother. "For the day you decide to stop apologizing for shining. Inside you will find the key to the world I once held. Use it wisely." Beneath the letter was a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate locket shaped like a crescent moon. Its clasp bore the engraving I had recognized in the hairpin, a swirling EW etched into the metal. I could feel a tremor in my chest, the kind that happens when the past and present collide. Every memory of her, teaching me to see value in the small, forgotten things, showing me that beauty survives through care, rushed back. Jenny had once asked me why I never displayed certificates or accolades. This was why. Some truths were private. Some treasures were personal. I turned the locket over, lifting it into the sunlight. Inside was a miniature portrait, a tiny woman in pearls staring back at me. Her gaze was steady, almost challenging. Beneath it, a miniature compartment held an old map, yellowed with age. The edges of the paper were frayed, but the ink was clear. A ledger of parcels, shipments, and destinations that had once belonged to my grandmother. I realized then that my grandmother had not only preserved beauty, she had concealed power. A small empire of objects and knowledge that could have shaped my mother's generation differently. And now, by some quiet design, it had found me. I sank to the floor, the locket pressed to my chest. The snow outside reflected in the window, pale light spilling across the floor. The city was alive below, ignorant of the treasures hidden in its own streets. My mother approached slowly. I didn't know." "You didn't need to," I said, "but now it's mine to understand." Nathan's voice came from the doorway, hesitant and unfamiliar. "You're really going to use this?" "Yes," I said, because she trusted me to see it, to protect it, and to let it grow. He stepped back, unsure whether to scowl or apologize. I did not wait for him. I rose, brushing dust from my coat, and walked out into the hallway, the letter and locket secure in my hands. That night, in my apartment above the noodle shop, I laid the treasures on my desk. I examined each item meticulously, the engraving, the map, the compartments. Every detail was deliberate, a trail of breadcrumbs left by someone who had understood the power of observation and patience. I realized something profound. The work I had done in the cramped office, the hours of polishing, cataloging, and learning to see in the shadows, it had been preparation. Not for wealth, not for recognition, but for this moment. The locket and letter were the key to a story that had begun long before I was born, and it was mine to continue. As I traced the delicate lines of the engraving with my finger, a thought settled quietly in my mind. This was the first piece of the puzzle, the first tangible thread connecting me to the legacy my grandmother had left. The larger story was waiting, and it would not be found by hesitation or fear. It would be found by moving forward, step by step, decision by decision. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet thrill of destiny. The quiet I had carried through my childhood, my studies, my early career, it was now an ally. And with it, I could begin to reclaim what had been hidden, unseen, yet always intended for me. I turned off the lamp and gazed out at the city lights. The snow had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. In the reflections on the glass, I saw not the invisible girl I had once been, but a woman ready to step into her own story. And the story had only just begun. The calls started early that morning. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the desk, each vibration a reminder that the world outside my apartment still expected obedience. My mother first. "Kira, please, let's talk." Then Nathan, "You can't just ignore us forever. Even my father tried. Come home for dinner. We need to discuss this." I let them ring, each message stacked like bricks, but I didn't move. I sat at my desk, the locket and letter from Grandma Evelyn before me, tracing the engraving again. The initials caught the morning light. This is not theirs to control. Finally, I picked up the phone, not to speak to them, but to call Jenny. "We might have a visitor," I said. "Prepare the office, not a client." She raised an eyebrow. "Family?" "Yes," I said simply. "I'm done hiding." By the time they arrived, my apartment looked like a professional studio. Cases neatly arranged, reports filed. Each display contained a story, each gem a testament to patience and endurance. My mother stepped in first, hesitation etched in every movement. "Kira," I gestured toward the counter. "Sit, I'll make coffee." She obeyed, carefully, the way one handles glassware. Nathan lingered in the doorway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. My father remained standing, hands in pockets, a posture of half command, half weariness. "You can't keep ignoring us," Nathan began. "We know about the money, about the company. You can't just pretend we don't exist." "I never pretended," I said. "I just never considered your opinions necessary for my survival." The words hung in the air, sharp as cut crystal. My mother's hand trembled around her cup. "Kira, we were struggling. You could have helped. You could have." "I don't know. I did help," I interrupted, calm but firm. "Anonymously, you just never noticed. And when Nathan claimed credit, you let him." Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, "I didn't know it was you." "I know," I said. "That was the point. It wasn't about recognition. It was about survival, yours and mine." Nathan snorted. "So what, you just left us? Took everything for yourself?" I set the locket down on the table. "No. I took responsibility for what was mine, and what I inherited. That includes the legacy Grandma Evelyn left me, something you neither understood nor respected." My father finally spoke, a low growl. "You're being dramatic. We're your family." "Family doesn't have a monopoly on morality," I said, "and it doesn't give you the right to exploit me or my choices." There was a long silence. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. The coffee cooled, forgot. The only movement was the faint trembling of my mother's hands. I picked up a small stack of files, reports from recent evaluations. I placed them on the table, each one labeled meticulously. "These represent what I've built, not gifts, not loans, not favors, my work, my effort, my decisions." My mother swallowed hard. "But, no," I said, cutting the sentence short. "You do not get to claim this. You did not nurture it, you cannot demand it. It is mine, and it is not negotiable." Nathan's expression faltered. For once, the bravado was gone. He was just a boy who had been told too late that the person he tried to control had been shaping herself long before he noticed. "I understand that this may hurt," I continued, "but it is necessary, because nothing I have will survive if I allow it to be controlled by fear, entitlement, or ignorance." I saw them reel, the truth crashing through them like a tide. "I am done," I said. "Done justifying, explaining, or entertaining claims that belong to no one but me. You may leave now." My father's fists clenched. My mother's lips pressed together. Nathan's shoulders sagged. None of them moved immediately. The air felt electric, like glass ready to shatter. Then I gestured toward the door. "Please, I've given you ample time." Slowly, they retreated. First my father, then my mother, and finally Nathan. Each step heavy, each footfall a concession. When the door closed behind them, the apartment felt lighter. Jenny entered quietly. "They really came," she said. "Yes," I said, "and now they know the boundaries." I walked to the window, looking out over the city. Morning sunlight glittered on the streets, reflecting off the buildings like scattered gems. The wind carried the faint scent of winter snow and toasted bread from the bakery below. For the first time in years, I felt an unfamiliar weight lift, not the burden of silence, but the weight of self-possession. I reached for the locket again, running my finger along the engraving. Evelyn's initials seemed to pulse faintly in the morning light. The letter's instructions echoed in my mind: use it wisely. I knew exactly what that meant now. It did not mean revenge. It did not mean indulgence. It meant clarity, control, independence, and finally, freedom. The apartment was quiet after they left. The wind rattled the windows gently, like a reminder that the world keeps moving, indifferent to grudges or apologies. I sat at my desk, the locket from Grandma Evelyn before me, tracing the delicate engraving of her initials. Jenny placed a cup of coffee beside me. So, that's it? I shook my head slowly. Not quite. That was just the first step. They need to understand that I am not theirs to command. But I also need to understand what I'm responsible for. I spent the morning drafting letters, invoices, and reports. Every detail of my business, every transaction, every appraisal had to be precise, unassailable. It was not vanity, it was protection. Each report, each note, a barricade. By noon, I decided to confront the rest of my personal history. I pulled out the ledger Grandma Evelyn had hidden in the locket. The fragile pages detailed shipments, consignments, and pieces that had once been hers. Reading it, I realized she had quietly built a network of trust and knowledge. Pieces moved through the world with purpose, and she had recorded everything, expecting someone to continue the legacy. I understood then why she had chosen me. The day blurred into evening as I called the remaining clients I could reach, confirming appointments, arranging secure shipments. Each conversation was steady, deliberate, a rehearsal for the larger assertion I knew I would have to make. At dusk, I stepped onto the small balcony of the apartment. The city spread before me, gleaming lights reflecting the snow's thin layer. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. No one could claim my time. No one could manipulate my decisions. Every step, every choice was mine. I could feel the weight of that power settling into my bones. The next morning, I returned to the apartment to find a courier waiting. A large box, marked fragile, addressed to me only. Inside was a collection of papers, letters, and small jewelry pieces, all tied together with a ribbon in Evelyn's handwriting. I carefully opened the first letter. Kira, you now have what I never could finish. Each piece, each mark, each note is yours to continue, protect, and grow. The world may try to claim it from you, but you must know, only you can wield it with understanding. I held the letter close, feeling her presence. Every choice she had made for me, every quiet lesson, was a trust extended across time. Jenny arrived, noticing my solemnity. Everything okay? I nodded. More than okay. It's time to step fully into the story I was meant to tell. Over the next week, I implemented new protocols for my business. Every appraisal was logged meticulously, every shipment insured, every client correspondence archived. My independence wasn't just a statement anymore, it was a fortress. Late one night, I stood before the cases, touching the glass lightly. The gemstones, the antique brooches, and pendants reflected the lamp's light in tiny flares. I could almost hear Grandma Evelyn's voice whispering, "See, you see what others overlook. You understand what they cannot." The final realization settled in. The chain they had tried to bind me with, expectations, entitlement, ignorance, was no longer theirs to hold. They were free to misunderstand, to envy, or to resent, but their opinions would not dictate my life. I placed the locket on the top of the desk. Its crescent moon shimmered faintly under the lamp. The papers from Evelyn lay beside it. The city beyond the window was alive, indifferent, and breathtaking. I whispered to the quiet room, "I am no longer invisible. I am no longer bound." That night, sleep came easily. The chains were broken. Not through confrontation alone, but through deliberate, unyielding action. I had claimed control over my work, my legacy, and myself, and I knew the next step would not be simple. The world would test me, challenge me, but I would face it armed not only with knowledge and skill, but with a certainty I had never possessed as a child. The dawn promised a new chapter, one in which Kira Berry was fully present, fully alive, and entirely her own. The first time I stepped onto an international stage, I felt the city breathe beneath me. Paris stretched out in morning haze, rooftops stacked like old books, the Seine curling lazily between them. I clutched the small velvet box Grandma Evelyn had sent, the crescent moon locket inside, safe in my palm. The venue was austere but grand, a hall built to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls hung from the ceiling, catching the morning light in 1,000 broken rays. The audience was composed of collectors, curators, journalists, and a few academics who thought they were here to evaluate me. I wasn't intimidated, I was aware. Backstage, I opened my notebook for the last time. Notes on the pieces I had cataloged, stories I had uncovered, provenance painstakingly traced. Every word was deliberate, each sentence polished like a gem under the lamp. Jenny tapped my shoulder. "You're on in 5 minutes." I nodded, breathing deep, feeling the familiar pulse in my chest, the one that always arrived before a performance, before discovery. The lights dimmed. Applause rose faintly in the distance. I walked to the podium, placing the locket and letter beside me on the stand. "Good morning," I said, my voice carried across the hall. "I want to talk about the value of observation, endurance, and history." The presentation unfolded as a story rather than a lecture. Each piece I discussed was connected to a lesson, a moment of human care and preservation. I told the audience about a brooch mistaken for costume jewelry for decades, about a cameo that had survived wars and floods, about a locket that carried generations of love unnoticed. Then I spoke of the most personal lesson, the inheritance of trust and guidance from someone who had understood me better than the world ever did. I did not name Grandma Evelyn at first. I let the story speak for itself, the quiet lessons, the careful eye, the patient collection of knowledge across years. The audience was silent, not polite silence, real silence, the kind that stretches like air and settles in your chest. At the close, a journalist asked, "How did you know which pieces mattered?" I smiled faintly. I learned to see what others overlook. Some gems only reveal themselves to those who pay attention. Some stories only unfold for those who have waited to listen. Later, when the Q&A ended, I noticed a figure at the back, older, with silver hair, standing quietly. My heartbeat skipped. It was her, or at least her presence. Evelyn, the woman who had taught me to see. After the conference, I walked to the balcony. Paris glimmered beneath me, a constellation of streets, bridges, and memories. The locket rested against my palm. I opened it carefully. The crescent moon caught the sunlight, casting a faint reflection across my notebook. It was then I realized, the journey was never about the money, the clients, or the accolades. It was about vision, endurance, and reclaiming what had been entrusted to me. I whispered softly to the wind, "I understand now. I am ready." The city below seemed to hold its breath, glittering and patient. I felt the pulse of history, the inheritance of care and craft, and the echo of every moment I had endured. That night, I returned to my hotel room and placed the locket beside the ledger and letters from Grandma Evelyn. I traced the engraving with my fingertips. Her initials seemed to pulse faintly, as if acknowledging my presence. Jenny called from the apartment back in Chicago. "You're going to sleep, right?" "I will," I said, though sleep felt distant, unnecessary. Instead, I stared at the skyline, feeling a quiet exhilaration. I had stepped beyond the chains of expectation, beyond the shadows of invisibility. And tomorrow, I would continue the journey. The conference hall had emptied, leaving only echoes of my footsteps across polished stone floors. I retrieved the locket from the podium, its crescent moon glinting faintly in the fading light. The papers from Grandma Evelyn were stacked beside it, the ledger's edges curling like old sails. I opened the first page, tracing the careful handwriting. Each shipment, each note, each meticulous record revealed her foresight. She had not only preserved beauty, she had orchestrated a network of knowledge and trust that spanned continents. And now, in my hands, it had become tangible. A subtle thrill ran through me. The recognition I had once sought externally now belonged entirely to me. The gems, the documents, the knowledge, they were mine to protect, to grow, to wield. A knock on the hotel door startled me. Jenny entered, eyes wide. "They're asking for you," she said. "Someone from the foundation, Evelyn's connections. They want to see the collection personally." I smiled faintly. This was the moment the threads of past and present converged. The story that began decades ago, with a hairpin and whispered lessons, was unfolding. I led the representatives through the room, explaining provenance, significance, and historical context. They listened, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. It became clear they were not here to control or judge, but to honor. As the meeting concluded, a woman approached, her silver hair catching the last rays of sun. Evelyn, no, not her. Someone who had worked with her, trusted her, and now entrusted me. "Ms. Barry," she said softly, "your grandmother always knew someone with eyes like yours would find this." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Every hour spent cataloging, every long night studying, every lonely decision, it had led here. That evening, standing alone on the balcony overlooking Paris, I reflected on the journey. The family dinners, the silence, the betrayal, the small victories above the noodle shop, they had all been preparation. The chain of expectation my family tried to place on me was broken, replaced with purpose. I opened the locket once more, the crescent moon glowing faintly in my palm. I understood now. Freedom was not merely escaping the past. It was stepping fully into the life I had been trained to see, nurtured to comprehend, and entrusted to continue. The city shimmered below, a constellation of streets and lights reflecting off the Seine. I whispered softly, as if speaking to my grandmother herself, "I see it, Evelyn, I understand." And then I realized the final truth. The inheritance was never about control or wealth. It was about vision, endurance, and care. It was about knowing the value of what others overlook. I felt the quiet thrill of destiny, but this time it was steady, rooted in action and understanding, not in fear or need. The past had shaped me, yes, but it no longer held me. When I finally returned to my hotel room, I placed the locket and ledger side by side. The initials EW gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a final acknowledgement. I smiled, knowing that the lessons she had given me, through silence, guidance, and the legacy she had left, would continue through every gem I authenticated, every decision I made, every life I touched. I looked out at Paris one last time before closing the blinds. The city, indifferent and eternal, glittered like a field of scattered diamonds. The weight of past burdens lifted. In their place was clarity, purpose, and freedom. I was no longer the invisible girl, no longer a shadow behind someone else's world. I was Kira Barry, fully present, fully alive, and entirely my own. The locket gleamed one last time in the lamp's circle. I held it close and whispered, "It's my turn now." The night settled around me, calm, eternal, and full of promise.